Huh, great play, Mark. It's a real killer. Pathologic is one of the best and smartest games that's ever been made. And you know that's true because no one's played it. Okay, that's not quite accurate. A fair amount of people have tried to play it. The Steam release has achievements, and there's an achievement for surviving the first of the 12 in-game days. A day lasts about 2 hours. According to its global gameplay stats page, just 13.2% of all players made it far. The achievement for day 1 is called I'm Not Dead. It's just that kind of game. It occupies a certain kind of space in game criticism. Some game critics, mostly the ones who are good, will sing its praises day and night, call it the best game you've never played, argue it's a shining bastion of everything gaming could be but not isn't, and labour very intensely to explain why games don't have to be fun to be good. Journalist, board game critic, and wizard Quentin Smith wrote 3 incredible articles in 2008 for Rocket and Shotgun, which are probably hugely responsible for a lot of Western awareness of the game. But when someone reads articles like these, they might make the horrendous mistake of actually trying to play it. And we all know how that goes down. The game's just not fun. It's not interesting to look at. It doesn't feel good to play mechanically. It's frustrating. The story is confusing and wordy and translated from Russian by a mystical rat who only speaks in riddles. It lacks almost anything that would normally keep a person playing a game. And yet, people keep saying it's great. I think it's great too. It's an incredible game that barely anyone will have the resilience to actually play long enough to appreciate, and that's maybe even the point. So, this time on the assorted mess of unrelated concepts that can scarcely be called a YouTube channel, I'm going to talk about all the things I find particularly interesting about this game and what they bring to making it so unique. I'm also going to talk about the problems it has that prevented it from seeing mainstream success, and then give a spirited defense of half of those problems anyway in the name of their artistic value. It's not a bad game, it's an amazing game. But it's also a bad game. It's a major time investment too. In many ways, it's a more interesting game to discuss than play. It's possible that Pathologic only exists so that we may speculate about it. So, in a way, making this video is really for my benefit more than yours. I played over 60 hours of this thing. I have almost 600 gigs of Pathologic footage on my hard drive. I get to make a video about it! That was the deal! Part 1. What is Pathologic? Probably should have gotten the intro. On the surface, it's a very easy game to explain. Pathologic is a first-person survival horror RPG with story-rich and atmospheric. Doesn't it look fun? It's set in a town deep in the Russian steppe at some ambiguous point in the last 100 years. And by ambiguous, I mean imaginary. There are guns, but they're kind of old-timey types. A lot of the decor ranges from the late 1800s to early 1900s, but there's some Baroque-looking buildings lying around. The town is built around its meat industry, so there's bowls everywhere, but the abattoir is some kind of huge ancient building fused with the earth, and its workers live in a huge housing complex that looks nothing like the rest of the town. And some buildings are actively impossible, like these staircases to nowhere. And then there's the polyhedron, a giant floating tower that cannot be, sticking out of the earth, suspended by unknown means, and made partially out of its own blueprints. So, yeah, I'd say the time period's pretty ambiguous. You play as one of 3 different kinds of doctors who each arrive in the town for their own reasons, just at the beginning of the outbreak of a horrible plague that threatens the entire town, and probably the world if it manages to spread. The doctors have 12 days to get their shit together, save the town, and somehow survive long enough to do that. In some ways, it's kind of an immersive sim. You have an inventory, weapons, clothes, items, but look at the word. It's not food, it's passion. It's not medicine or healing, it's drugs. What is other? Well, that's where you keep less common stuff you can use or sell. Flowers you picked. And are those human organs? As soon as you hit new game, it becomes clear that any simple description of its basic genre conventions doesn't capture how the game actually feels. The 3 playable characters, the Bachelor, the Haruspecs, and the Changeling, aren't simply chosen by a menu. So it's all about tricking the team, wherever it is.
No. I detest trickery. But if we ourselves are to suffer deception, our hands are no longer tied. Where are we?
We open in a theatre, which you actually visit in the game world later, looking down on all three characters as they argue on stage over who is best suited to solving the problem.
I can do miracles. Just let me.
Will you please be quiet?
The dialogue gets across each character's basic viewpoint. It's also written in a strangely theatrical way.
The truth is, Marcia, I'm the operation. Medical moral idea.
Don't you go all pussy on me, clever cloaks. This calls for the gentle hand of a surgeon.
You're gentle. Not giving. You will inevitably do harm. As for Brainy, he has no regard for casualties at all.
It sounds written, it's not even trying to be natural. It's like you're watching bad actors stumbling through their lines while rehearsing for a play, which you are. The actual play is about to begin with you playing as one of them. They conclude they can't work together and time is of the essence, and the house lights go down.
We won't ever get along. I suggest we be on our way. The sooner the better.
Off we go then?
Let's go. The clock is ticking.
When you go to leave the theatre, then you get to choose which one you play. Even before the game is started, the presentation is strangely off-kilter and brings in ideas of performance and the theatrical. It's definitely the weirdest character selection process I've ever experienced. You can't play as the Changeling until you've finished the game as one of the first two, but frankly, if you're actually going to play the game more than once, you should play both of the first two first, and really you ought to start with the Bachelor. He's regarded as the default pathologic experience. He's slightly easier, and his character is an outsider from the town, so you learn more about it from that perspective, and that's really helpful. The Bachelor, Daniil Dankovsky, is a Bachelor of Medicine and is working on the ultimate utopian project a doctor can aspire to, defeating death itself. It's not going well. The powers that be, the government I guess, are shutting down his lab unless he can come up with something substantive to back up his ideas. He's come to the town because he's heard that a man who lives there, Simon Kane, has lived a remarkably long life, so maybe he can learn something about defeating death from him. Your quest log has the main mission for that day, the side quests for that day, and your overall mission, which for the Bachelor is saving his career, and maybe your human life, by learning how to defeat death from Simon. So you go to meet him, and you learn from Simon's brother Georgie that he died right before you got there. Oh. Well, Georgie asks you to help him find out who or what killed him. Luckily, you think you have a lead on how he died because he met with a town community leader, Isidore Burach, right beforehand, and he was a respected local cultural figure and the town's head doctor of sorts. So they might have discussed his health or who might have wanted him dead. So you go to meet him, and he's dead too. People are speculating about a serial killer or a demonic steppe creature of myth, the Shabnak Adir, being responsible, and then you start to notice signs of a plague. And it becomes clear it probably killed both of them and is about to kill everyone else. For days and days, as the lives of people in the town and your own odds of survival get worse and worse, that original quest, Dankovsky's bright-eyed, naive mission to defeat death itself on his way to meet a dead man, will stare you in the face every time you open the menu and check the mission. For Dankovsky, this message doesn't update when saving himself or the town become his priority. For the rest of your sad life, you have to deal with being reminded that you came here for something completely unrelated. So, yeah, get used to that. Pathologic's not a game about getting answers or resolutions to your personal quests or even about being heroic. It's not a game about feeling safe or having fun. It's a game about Part 2, Utility and Disempowerment. You might be wondering why I'm reading the words out when they're on the screen, and that's because some people like to listen to these videos instead of watching. I've put a lot of effort into my visuals, but, you know, that's fine. So I think an important way of explaining the features and effects of this game is to talk about the first thing that will probably happen to the player. You start the game in the house of Eva Yan, who's letting you sleep upstairs. She tells you that she's heard noises outside and there's some strange men hanging out in her garden. Oh, I know how games work. This is a tutorial quest. RPGs sometimes have easy early quests that act as a sort of microcosm of the game, a tutorial for how various mechanics work. So you go outside and you're greeted by these strange boys. These aren't the characters hanging out in her garden. These are more
Pesky
tutorial
test.
figures. These are characters that pop up a lot in the game,
Well, here's hoping
tragedians
it's
and
working.
executors.
Looks like it's
These are their
reacting.
costumes, they're actors at the local theatre, performing plays and so on. But executors also perform important roles during the plague, like getting posted up outside the houses of important sick people to relay messages. Given that the game is already being framed as one large theatre performance with you as an actor, sometimes they break the fourth wall. Like right now, where they're telling you, a living human person, how to live in the world. These characters teach you how the basic mechanics work. Time advances no matter what, so if you don't do the important things you're supposed to be doing, other people will have to do them for you and might get sick. And you might need them not to get sick, so maybe don't let that happen. Your reputation is important, so don't start too many fights. Eat food so you don't starve and die, and so on. This game came out in like 2004, so the idea of having to eat and not die and time mechanics was actually pretty unique for the time. This is executed in an awesome way. Look at how this tutorial is framed. This conversation won't take too much of your time, especially since time stops during dialogues, and our dialogue is extremely important. You need to know how to play after all. What are you talking about? I'm neither a gambler nor an actor. He doesn't understand what the tragedian means by play. The tragedian is talking past him to you, so that you know the mechanics, but the bachelor has no idea why someone's telling him this. Need I remind a wise man like you of the fact hunger is sated with food? Food can be found in shops. The bachelor is having the weirdest conversation of his life. The fourth wall breaking stuff in this game is genuinely the best. Anyway, what's next? Ah yes, the side quest! So you go around to see about the men in Eva's garden and get a cutscene showing them, and you realise one of them is a creepy looking, inhuman worm man. Great, another thing I'll have to figure out later, I guess. If you try to make them leave in a threatening way in dialogue, a fight starts. The way fights work in this game is you get beaten to death in a matter of seconds and the game is over.
Hopefully you enjoy the background video of Mr. H.
Oh jeez. Hello again, you two. Ah, no need to be so dramatic. Actually, no, that's your job, isn't it? In Pathologic, combat deliberately feels off. The game has fighting mechanics in the same sense that a car being driven off a cliff has flight mechanics. Punching is slow and plays a random animation with a different length before the attack actually goes off, and its range is highly deceptive. The range enemies have with their attacks is hard to decipher as well. It's very swimmy, like there's lag in a single-player game. You have to learn to intuit exactly when to close in for your attack to hit, and when to step back and not get killed. It's quite hard to be good at fighting in this game. The game does everything it can to stack the deck against you if you get in a fight. The muggers who spawn at night open their combat with you by throwing a knife at your face, which, no joke, deals like 90% of your health in a single hit. No one gets distracted by guards once they pick a target. They just keep going for you while the guards chase them and hit them in the back. And they seem to only reliably drop loot if you're the one who kills them. You can right-click to trigger a blocking animation, which is pretty cool. It doesn't actually do anything though. Guns are eventually an option. They kill in 1 or 2 hits, but bullets are super rare, they're really expensive, and you have a tendency to miss even when you're pointing the gun right at someone's head. I don't know, it just feels a little weird. But this actually works in the context of the gameplay because it further disincentivizes you in doing combat, because even sure bets like bringing a gun to a knife fight are never really that sure. Fighting always feels like a risk, and it instills that you're not really supposed to live through this game while getting in tons of fights. You're never handed satisfaction or enjoyment from fighting, which normally is the sort of thing that's the most visceral part of a game experience. The game knows this too, and likes to throw challenges designed to hurt you and not be satisfying right in your face. Once you're past the point in the game where you're very likely to have a revolver, a weapon with 6 shots before a very slow and vulnerable reloading animation, a side quest pits you against 7 guys. And you have to stand still to open the menu, which doesn't pause the game, to unequip it to switch to anything else. It's like the creators are laughing at you, seeing what deliberately weird, difficult thing they can put in front of you and have you still actually do. This whole fight is optional, so really, it's your fault if you decide to try a dozen times to shoot 7 people with a gun with 6 chambers. Remember how I said early quests in games are like a tutorial? The lesson of this tutorial is you're gonna die if you make bad decisions. Heck, you're still probably gonna die if you make good decisions. Fighting is hard and punishing, especially against more than one person, And realistically, you wouldn't be seeking out fights like this. You should be trying not to get killed first. A 2-on-1 fight in the first 2 minutes of the game, before you know all the quirks of its combat, is a death sentence, and the developers know it. They put this fight in here to teach the player lessons about how they should be thinking about the idea of fighting, or on the whole taking unnecessary risks. Death is cheap, and your health is expensive. I mean that literally too. How do you get health back? Simple. Just rest in a bed for a few hours and... Oh. No, that does nothing.
Actually, it just made everything worse. My hunger meter's gone up now.
Okay, I'll eat an egg. And... Oh no, that's not going to close my wounds. It's an egg. It made my hunger go down. But wait, it only made it go down a tiny amount. And that was all the food I could afford. Oh, I'm fucked! The only reliable way to heal is to take a painkiller like Meridorm or Novocaine. These are expensive, but they cause you to regain health over the course of a few in-game hours, which is agonizingly slow, but it works. They also cause a lot of exhaustion, which also raises over time while you're awake, and causes you health damage if it maxes out, just like hunger.
There are items that heal you without any downsides, tourniquets and bandages, but they don't heal you that much. They're pretty hard to acquire, and they're worth enough money that you might as well just sell them and buy some more delicious eggs.
Basically, in this game, taking damage hurts. After retrying a few times, if you manage to kill the 2 people in this fight, the items they drop are barely worth the health you lost to get them. You get a couple of bullets, like literally a handful, and you don't even have a gun to use them with yet. If you used the weapon you started with in the fight, your scalpel, it's taken durability damage and is now already less effective, and you're not able to get that repaired. Oh yeah, weapons lose durability and effectiveness in this game, and they do it super fast. This fight is barely worth doing. When I was playing, I just reloaded and let the guys get on with whatever they were doing. They're on the run from the law, whatever, they'll be on their way soon. It's their problem and they're not interested in you or Eva anyways. You can even ask them what the deal is with this guy. He's just one of the locals. Some of the people of this culture are just physically different for some reason. For me, the canon choice my bachelor made was to leave these guys alone and just let them go away. It's fine. It's not worth it. This opening is an exercise in disempowerment. You're not the main character of the story. I mean, first of all, there's literally 2 other main characters, but on a deeper level, you're not special. And sometimes you have to keep your head down to survive. You are nobody's hero.
Your character's stats page is a really helpful way of keeping up with all 8 of the chokeholds the game has you in.
Reputation goes down when you start fights, kill people or other generally immoral things, and goes up when you do good things like in quests, or killing muggers, or giving money to the poor, or medicine and alcohol to the sick. Not to cure them, but to help ease their pain so they can die in peace.
That was my
morbid way of doing good. Despite being an RPG where you can get into fights with anyone you want in the street, a la Fallout or Elder Scrolls, the game has a very powerful ability to strongly incentivize that you don't do whatever you want. Not only do fights hurt, but your survival relies on you being accepted by society. If your reputation is too low, shopkeepers won't sell to you, and then you're kinda doomed to starve to death, or to get sick to death, or die to death.
Exhaustion just goes up over time and is reduced by sleeping.
But there are things like raw coffee beans and lemons which reduce exhaustion and give you more time to do things other than sleeping. But lemons increase your hunger and coffee decreases your health, just like in real life. But what's immunity and infection? Well, immunity is your ability to resist the plague. Kind of? Not really. When the plague becomes a factor, if you walk into a cloud of plague or get touched by a plague carrier or bitten by a rat, you get the plague. Your immunity defaults to 50%. There's expensive medicines you can take which increase it temporarily, but these also hurt you to use, and you have to use quite a few to raise your meter a useful amount. If the meter's absurdly high, and I mean close to 100%, and you're wearing a couple clothes that protect from infection, if you get hit by the plague, you might not get infected. It'll just lower your immunity a bunch so you get infected the next time you touch something. Hooray! If you get infected, you start to lose health over time, and occasionally your camera gets all wobbly and distorted, and your infection level starts to raise non-stop, and as it gets higher, the effects will get worse. And if you get too infected, some NPCs will try to kill you with fire. There are antibiotics which decrease your infection level, but these also hurt you to take, and are also expensive, and don't actually stop the plague once you're infected. How do you cure the plague? You can't. Fuck you! Don't catch the plague, shithead! It's not really up for discussion, is it? It's the fucking plague. Plagues are really bad. Statistically, in Europe from 1200 to 1800, roughly 100% of all living people died of the plague. Okay, there are items that can cure the plague, but you really want to not be wasting those. The game's about curing the plague, so you kind of might want to not use those on your personal status effects. If you get infected, either load a save or prepare to have one extra thing to worry about for the rest of the entire game. There's one other important meter you'll need to keep a close eye on as well. Time. The clock doesn't wait for you. Every day has a main quest, and you have to complete the quest on time, or someone else has to do your job for you. And they're not as good at your job, so...
The night has come. The most pressing endeavours of the day were fulfilled at the expense of several lives.
If you don't complete a quest in time, the story advances without you as one of your friends gets sick, which means you won't be able to talk to them unless you give up some of your medicine at the door to keep them upright for the day. Some quest lines take place in certain times too, so you need to keep an eye on things to plan ahead. Between all this and reputation, the game imposes a horrible feeling of pressure that never really lets off. There are so many things to manage, to think about, just to stay alive. And that's not even getting into the story you're trying to progress while you do all this. You're always on the clock, and almost always need to be in two places at once. And as you navigate the town to get where you're supposed to be going, you get more and more aware of how slowly you walk. You can't run. It's just this. It's horrible. You're not a character in a fun RPG, you're a person, traveling at frustratingly person-like speeds, trying to outrun about 8 different ways of dying. This is one of the first truly divisive things about the game. The walk speed is slow, and most of the game is about walking from place to place, walking to buy food, walking to buy medicine, walking to the trash can to find things to trade, walking to talk to people, and walking to the theatre to see it predict all the walking you're gonna do. Speaking of the theatre, every day after midnight they rehearse a new play. These often comment on what happened that day or predict the future in quite interesting ways.
People only fear bloodshed when it's their blood and their shed.
Yeah, that's right. Stay out of my shed. What the fuck are you talking about? And as the plague spreads, you start having to either take longer routes to avoid infected districts, or start risking infection and having to make saves and lose even more time. This is not fun. Or pretty. It's just walking. I've had people tell me the walking is what turned them off. It takes so long to get anywhere. Even if you're not in immediate danger because things are going well, you're still giving up a lot of your time going places. And the clock is still ticking down. So you're always racing, and you're always racing slowly. But this is also the point of the game in microcosm. It's not supposed to be fun on its own. Here's a head scratcher. Are games supposed to be fun? Maybe, but should they always be? Is that the only reaction games can or should explore correctly for their players? Well, I think it's useful to at least experiment. This boredom isn't a bug, it's a feature. It adds even further to this sense of disempowerment. It also has a profound emotional effect. As you get increasingly aware of your impending doom and how limited your abilities to get things done really are, even walking around becomes tense and stressful. Pathologic is the subtlest survival horror experience I've ever played. The act of standing still in the game makes me nervous. I'm wasting time. Oh shit, it's 3 o'clock, I have to be somewhere. After a while, even the process of the travel starts to really get its hooks in you. Once you get used to it, there's nothing quite like it. As the story deepens and becomes more complex, the travel becomes an opportunity to think about what's happening, if you're being played, why you're being asked to do this, who it really benefits, whether someone's messing you around to waste your time and stop you figuring out what's really going on. The walking becomes the most engaging thing in the world. I've never been more alone with my own thoughts than when I was playing Pathologic. I'm one of the 2 remaining defenders of No Man's Sky. The others were lost in the Great Purge. But when it came out, I liked it at the time, almost primarily because it came closer than any other game to doing this. In fact, I made reference to Pathologic in my little video about it. But in reality, Pathologic is still the absolute greatest of this. It's No Man's Sky to shame. Especially when all the patches made it much more like what I always wanted, and much less like what I had enjoyed. I should revisit that game. Imagine a game holding your attention not because anything in particular is happening, but entirely because it's got inside your head. Oh, and then just to make sure you're paying attention, a plague cloud made of screaming skulls flies at you and you go, ah! The constant racing against the multitudinous clocks of time, exhaustion, and hunger, trying to get enough surplus stuff done to afford to manage it all, and the many ways you can be killed easily or survive, but with the game made even harder by taking damage or losing time or getting infected, or getting so desperate you decide to kill a guy in a dark alley for his food, is the exact opposite of a heroic fantasy story. At all times, the player feels powerless. Instead of the player being free, but with some survival mechanics to keep track of, it's flipped. The game is a large collection of things that will kill you unless you submit yourself to their whims. You're free, but you should be doing what you're supposed to be doing or you'll fail and die. You're placed under a level of constant stress maintaining your frail body while racing against time to actually get anything else done. You're always technically in control, but it's hard not to avoid the feeling that you're the one being played by the game, constantly reminded of all the things you don't have time to do, all the things you need to avoid, and worrying maybe the game's gonna come up with something new to stab you with on the next day. Which, part 2.2, day 2. I came up with the titles in this video to amuse myself. I don't really care what you think about them. Day 1 is kind of a walk in the park. You even have enough leeway to take a walk in some of the parks. You get used to the basic mechanics, buy and eat some food, progress the story a little, and meet some of the other characters, and at the end you realise that a plague might be about to hit. If you manage to survive day 1 and complete the quest, well, congratulations, you've done better than most players, but the real game hasn't started yet. Day 2 is the next big hurdle, and even less people make it past that. The Bachelor's Day 2 is where players will decide if this game is for them or not, and the drop-offs in terms of achievements demonstrate this pretty well. You'll know if the game is to try to continue with after this, so you make it to bed on time with a decent amount of money prepared in case you need to buy more things, and with all your meters sufficiently handled. Maybe everyone's warnings about how hard this game is were sufficient to prepare you, and you've got this in the bag now. On the morning of day 2, prices rise tenfold. The money you started the game with is no longer enough to buy a single delicious egg. The plague hasn't properly hit yet, but word's got out there's an outbreak coming, and people are stockpiling food and medicine. Not only is being able to afford food suddenly a much more pressing question than you expected, any food you do have on you doesn't seem like a good idea to eat. I mean, that's a lot of money you're holding. To make matters worse, the town's governor, Alexander Sabarov, won't agree to do anything about the plague because he'll be seen to be overstepping the mark if the other rulers of the town don't agree on there being one. So a plague is starting, but no one with the power to take proper action will help because everyone has their own agenda. So you spend a good deal of the day with your hunger rising and no sure way to solve it because your money is worthless now, running around trying to find enough proof to get all the is a plague and to give Sabarov the power to start making emergency orders. Your main quest is getting these warring factions to agree that the obvious problem exists. Along the way, you pick up 2 side quests. In one of them, you need to find a buddy of yours, Andres Tomatin, and upon agreeing that the shit's hit the fan, arrive in town, you decide to get out while you can. But Andre won't leave without his buddy. He doesn't want to leave that much. But Sabarov, the guy who will get emergency powers anytime soon, bears a long-standing grudge against Peter, which will probably lead to him getting killed once that happens. And this isn't unfounded, by the way. When Sabarov does get emergency powers later in the game, he uses them to try to get Peter killed. So you need to get proof this is the case to get Peter to agree to leave with you, which you get from talking to Maria Kane, Simon's niece, about this issue. However, if you tell her why you need to know this, she intervenes and prevents either of them from leaving, failing the quest. Unbeknownst to you, Maria needs these guys in the town for her own reasons, so don't do that. So you go to give this information to Peter. Ah, fuck! This is an actual recording of the first time I saw this statue. You can see in the footage that I freeze up. Like, it's terrifying. This is the second game ever to jump scare me with a fucking still object. It's genius. I can't wait to show you the other one sometime. That one's great too. You know which one I'm talking about. You all agree to meet at the train station at 10 PM. So you're starving and the town sucks, but at least you have an escape plan now. The second side quest is called The House of the Living. Several of the town's more charitable people have decided to establish a shelter for when the epidemic hits, and they each give you money to buy some food for the shelter before the prices rise any further. I will make the purchases. I have to do a lot of walking today anyway. The money they give you is not enough to buy all the food they want, so you actually have to use whatever spare money you have or sell some of your items to afford this. You give up all your remaining money and items to get food you also need just to give it away, and you have to watch your hunger go up and your time go down as you rush around trying to find the stores with any bread or meat left. When you get it all, you're told the location of the shelter so you can deliver it. Let's just break this down. Part of a quest, on a day when food is incredibly scarce, involves carrying a ton of food somewhere and not eating it. It's actual torture running around watching that hunger meter go up and not knowing how you're going to resolve it, even though you're technically holding a solution the whole time. It's awkward and engaging and tense in a way that no game has achieved before success. The game doesn't punish you for easy either. You don't have to do this quest. You can just keep the food or the money you were given to buy it with and just ruin the chance to build the shelter. But you don't, because that's hardly what a doctor would do. And maybe there's a reward for doing it, or it helps you further down the line. You're making a positive moral choice on a quest in a video game. You know how this works. There's something in it for you. So, you go to deliver the food. The house has already been hit by the plague. Everyone there is sick and dying, and the plague clouds will actively hunt you through the house if you stay too long. There's an executor there who tells you this mission was obviously a failure, so you leave and go back to the quest giver and give her all the food intended for the shelter. She gives you some nuts to tide you over as thanks for your hard work. The reward for successfully following this quest is dramatically worse than the money or food you could have just run away with. At the very least, this quest results in finding food, so the part of the main quest where you go in search of a plague-ridden house is at least solved by this too. If you do the main quest instead though, you get a genuinely terrifying encounter where as soon as you realise you've found a house filled with removed by the plague, once you try to leave, it spawns 2 more right where you just came from, and they try to grab you to appeal for help and give you the plague if they do, and you just have to dodge past them. It's genuinely super scary. Emotionally awful. Use the band-aid is willing to die. It's a horrible nightmare, which thankfully you cannot do if you did the House of the Living. Finally, Saburov has the power he needs to start establishing hospitals, food, distributing medicine, and so on. And he even gives you a gun. So it's a day late, but things are finally where they should have been already. Perhaps too late to prevent a full-on outbreak, but better than nothing at all. You can defend yourself a little better now, at least. Luckily, you're getting out of here soon. As the BPM rolls around, your quests have been one major failure, and one minor resolution to a power squabble that you're sure will heat up again tomorrow, and you haven't eaten anything, so you head to the train station. When you get there, you find guards blocking the trains. The Sonathan brothers are nowhere to be seen if people show up, and according to the guards, no one can enter or leave the town now because it's under quarantine thanks to the emergency powers you helped Saburov get. You just trapped yourself in the town. If you try to talk your way out, all the guards attack you, and you lose reputation for killing them because these guys were just doing their job. Best of all, there's an executor standing there. This one doesn't say anything, and seemingly can't be seen by the other actors. He just stares at you, letting you know he knows how dramatic the irony is, laughing at you for thinking you can just leave the town. So you're trapped, and you're starving. In the middle of the night, you go to see a play being rehearsed at the theatre. The play's about how you're fucked.
Bad news. The governor will abuse his power.
When the morning hits, the game nonchalantly says it all ends in less than 10 days. Exhausted from a day's being a pawn in someone else's power grab and scrambling for resources for a quest that was doomed, starving after death, you eat one of the nuts. Great. You're completely fine, and you're on day 3. Day 2 is excellent game. It's deeply engaging, watching your attempts to get anything at all done get frustrating, and it also sets a general tone for the game. It does the special game I like to call recontextualizing. Players come to games with their own expectations and understandings of how a game is supposed to work and feel and play. A certain general set of ideas about how this is supposed to be like. If you're playing an open-world RPG, you know what dialogue trees, shops, trading, and hunger and time mechanics and moral choices are, and you think you know how they work. Day 1 partially plays into this. It takes pains to show how fragile you are and all the work you have to do to not die, doable. It makes sense. It doesn't feel that much different from a normal game. When the prices rise so massively that money is effectively worthless, and you were given no warning this would happen, everything about how you relate to games is thrown out the window.
That
Do you feel that happen? Did your brain realize what just happened? Walking around while slowly starving, getting rid of the rest of your own items to try to get the food for a doomed quest, carrying food you can't eat around, and wondering when you will get to eat, and watching your meters inevitably rise as you race to help the town and only barely achieve anything, you start to make realizations about the scope of this experience. You weren't playing a game with the mechanic where you have the option of using money to buy things. You were playing a game about having no money. You weren't playing a game where you have to eat food to survive. You were playing a game about starving. You weren't playing a game where you can choose what sort of morals you have. You were playing a game about how betraying the people who trust you is better for you than trying to be a hero, and doing the right thing is an exercise in getting your time and energy and money wasted. Survival horror RPG? Lies. You are playing a pain simulator. This is a deeply masterful trick I've seen very few developers pull, where commonly understood mechanics are twisted in such a fashion as to force the player into a specific mindset and relationship with those mechanics, and everything straightforward suddenly becomes different, off. Once day 2 happens, you no longer have any idea what's coming. Money turning out to be virtually useless, the growing threat of the plague, who knows how bad things will get in the next few days. Even though the game doesn't get that much harder, and technically the game isn't that hard if you know what you're doing, this sequence of experiences fills you with dread for what might happen. The game doesn't stay this difficult forever. The point isn't how hard the game actually is if you measure it objectively. The point here is how the game makes you gameplay. The game has a reputation of being depressingly punishing and difficult. And while all this is true in places, it does get very hard in brief bursts, the fact that the game manages to create this reputation without always being that hard is a serious credit to its execution. Day 2 grinds you beneath its heel, and even if things pick up for you, or you master the art of stabbing bad men for extra cash, you'll never really feel in control again. And that is genius design. One of the ways you can make surviving slightly easier is to sell your gun. The gun you just got is worth a lot of money, and so are bullets, which might be good for solving some of the more pressing issues of the game. You don't get in that many fights, especially if you're avoiding them, but being put in a position where the best chance of survival is getting rid of one of the main things a first-person shooter is known for, it's even in the name, that's a notable thing. Almost everyone I know who made it this far sold their first gun, allowed themselves to remain vulnerable for the chance to maybe not die of something else. You can also learn to hold on to certain objects to trade for better things. In trash cans you can find all kinds of stuff. Sometimes people throw out jewellery or needles or empty bottles, which you can refill with water for free and drink to reduce hunger and increase exhaustion, or save up to trade for bandages with the town drunks. The children in the town will trade flowers or nuts or blades for various useful things like medicine and bullets. So the nuts you got were useful, you just might not have learned their value. And this is another bigly clever thing the game does. The economy isn't as simple as I give you money and you give me my delicious egg. It's a web of needs and wants from a variety of NPCs which informs the value which you can benefit from if you pay attention and learn. The game never hands any of this to you, and that makes discovering the importance of those things feel good, like you've worked together and solved something. One type of child in the town is sometimes, very rarely, has an item on her called Schmauder. They're expensive to trade for, but they're good. If you use it, it reduces your health to almost nothing, but it cures you. There's a very limited amount of cures available throughout the story, so getting your hands on some of these is a real help. Even if their downsides are too much for you to risk using, other people pay thousands and thousands of rubles for them, almost $50 worth. Hey, maybe some of your friends might need curing later. Just saying. This all works in the context of the story, too. Actor is in a foreign town, his customs aren't like the ones he's used to, and so are you. And all this tension in the story happens largely while you're just walking from place to place. It's quite an experience. And this experience is enhanced by the game's music, which is some of the best in the business. It takes a front seat during a lot of the walking, and it does excellently with that spotlight. It's intensely atmospheric and moody, and when it
needs to be restrained and unsettled.
Oh shit, I got it.
It feels at the same time natural and painless, like you're witnessing a normality
let's
that
invade
isn't
the city
familiar
of
to
the
you
gods.
personally.
Okay, pathologic.
Synths are used alongside more naturalistic drums and rhythms to further destabilize the setting.
Right.
The music even evolves with the story. Each main region of the town has a theme, and when that area gets infected, its theme changes and becomes even more strange and distorted. On top of the slightly remixed original music, you can now hear a distant and frenzied chant. Some of the tracks sound subtly different for different characters, which is awesome. The opening theme is a real banger too.
Get to the elevator, or depending on how long that takes, and depending on how long that takes, I'll
Except
try and
it
break
sounds
into
oddly
Anor
familiar.
Londo.
I can't quite put my finger up. Oh. Oh, damn it, part 3. The writing. By now, if you've been pausing to read the text for some reason, you'll be very aware of how strange the writing is. And whenever you begin dialogue with someone, they actually say something out loud.
When we do not find peace of mind in ourselves, it is useless to seek it elsewhere.
Truth
What?
does not do as much good in the world as the appearance of truth does evil.
Oh wow, that's a good quote. I'm gonna use that in a future video and pretend a philosopher said it. Watch out for that. Everyone's very wordy and flowery, talking about their dreams and visions. Sometimes it's hard to tell if you're discussing philosophy instead of the task at hand. The game has a very specific writing style, one more evocative of your typical novel than other games, and it is, in my opinion, very well written. It succeeds in making you feel transported to a world where things aren't as simple as they seem, where dream and metaphor are entangled with reality. If a sentence feels strange or hard to follow, it's doing that on purpose to make you feel weird, like you have to put effort into understanding. Instead of simply telling you you're a small part of a strange universe, it makes you feel that way by refusing to pull its punches with the
Killing that
ideas it's
guy
meditating
called-
on.
yeah.
Try this on for size. Do you believe in
Since if we
prophecies,
don't
Andres
kill it,
Tomato?
It depends.
we'll have
I
to
agree this
deal
may
with
seem
two.
inconsistent with materialism.
And
On the other
it'll
hand, when your own
make
experience convinces you to their effectiveness, you have to take them into account.
I wondered at myself. For a moment, I thought he was driven by the same feeling that I am. A great man, when unexpectedly betrayed by the people he loves, will often seek to fill the whole universe with his
So
blind
if I
spite.
don't
Yes,
deal
the feeling is
this one
indeed
of the
familiar.
admin
No one
numbers.
talks out loud like this in real life, but that's not a mistake, it's part of the point. You're stuck in a world where
That will
people
make-
do talk like that, and have to untangle it to make sense of things. It's very hard to call this game pretentious, because not only does pretentious
Anor
mean
Londo
affecting a greater importance than is actually possessed, and the game definitely does say important things, but it's also too self-aware about how all this looks, and it loves to make fun of itself. The plays make fun of the characters and the plot and writing style. The cool fourth wall-breaking executives complain about how unwieldy their outfits are. It's lovely stuff. While this video is definitely going to spoil lots of the plot, there's lots of really interesting aspects I won't have time to go into detail about. If you want a more complete breakdown and analysis of different characters' stories, YouTuber Solmatul made a great video doing so, linked in the description. There's such a ridiculous amount of depth and complexity that it still astounds me now, and even trying to cover all of it is beyond my power. When I was talking about this with Mandalore Gaming, whose video on Pathologic is also really worth checking out, he offhand mentioned an entire aspect of one of the characters I'd completely forgotten about, and isn't even in Sol's video either. This game is about as dense with story as a real novel, with an equivalent amount of wordplay. Obviously, really getting across the cumulative feel of the writing style is hard to do in video form, and I was never really good at book reports anyway, so instead I'll talk about some of the more specific storytelling techniques that help the game achieve what it's going for. Firstly, the constant use of deception. Other characters lie to you for all kinds of reasons, or have access to incomplete information and then share it unreliably. There's lots of manipulation and hearsay going on, and it's left to you to figure out what's actually happening. Every character in this game has their own end. Why does Maria Kane want to keep the Stomatans in town? Why does the Inquisitor seem to always want to investigate the polyhedron and find an excuse to destroy it? Did Olgimsky lock up the termitary to prevent the plague from getting in? Or has it already struck the place and he was trying to prevent it spreading out? Are his complaints that you should be looking into the Kane's business first a genuine concern for their power plays? Or is he just trying to get you out of his hair to pretend? This goes the other way as well, of course. Sometimes you can play dumb to learn more about someone than they'd let on if they thought you weren't on their side. And sometimes you can lie for your own benefit, like you can get a second pistol if you tell Andro you don't have one when he asks you. Figuring out and catching someone in a lie, or successfully lying to someone else, feels great because you really are gaining ground in a struggle for truth and control. It's very engaging getting lied to by a story and having to put the pieces together yourself. Secondly, there's the way you experience the same overall story from three very different perspectives. The Bachelor, for example, is a clever and rational-minded man, but he's so obsessed with pursuing his specific lines of inquiry that he spends a lot of time getting tricked into doing busy work or ignoring the real story. And when he is trying, he can be pretty bad at it. He's an outsider, but rather than working to gain people's trust and get on a decent footing, the player's text options relate that the character they're inhabiting can be a total asshole. But could I please offer you a piece of advice? I need no advice. I mean, look at this choice. This is something the Bachelor thought to say. You're supposed to be asking this guy for help, Daniel! What the fuck are you doing? Several characters in the story have the power to predict the future, and the Bachelor has the power to be a dismissive piece of shit to all of them. The Bachelor says things that he must think in his head sound really cool, but to say to another person is like super weird. You are broken, Lara. I, on the other hand, am used to winning. At numerous points in the game, you can just randomly say a Latin phrase to try and sound clever.
Medica morbo adhibe.
Aspity lies to the Bachelor about who's responsible for the town's water supply being destroyed, but the guy who actually did it just made a mistake. She's buying time for him to get to safety by sending you on a wild goose chase, because she rightfully believes the Bachelor will try to fucking kill the guy if he gets the chance. The Bachelor is such a piece of shit. Look how he talks to this poor woman. This is incredible characterization, like you're just stuck in the body of this pretentious buffoon. It's great. In conversation with the Haruspecs, Aspity casually refers to the Bachelor as the prickly prick that'll bury us all. Bachelor's plot is largely a struggle to do what seems obvious to him with his degree in medicine, but which conflict with the values of the people of the town. He wants to inspect Simon's body, but the Kanes have a family ritual where bodies are left unobserved for 24 hours. Then later he wants to dissect an infected body to study the plague, but the local culture forbids any kind of defilement of the body, including surgery and autopsies. It's a special rite given only to special families of medicine men, the Menku. The Bachelor spends multiple days literally and figuratively fighting the people he's trying to save, to the point of getting arrested, attempting to subvert their laws so he can help sort things out. By the end of this, Dankovsky has a very low opinion of the townspeople and their traditions, and decides he has to work within them to get anything done, and turns to someone who can do the things he can't. Over the course of his story, Dankovsky finds himself siding with the characters who appeal the most to his belief system about the world, and against the more folksy wisdom of the Haruspecs and the supposed miracle working of the Changeling. All three characters play through the same 12 days, and these stories aren't separate. Whichever character you play, the other characters are dropped in the world too, and follow their stories as well. You even interact with them as part of your story. You cross paths with the other characters quite a lot, but you never really have an understanding of what the other character's path is. Early on it sounds like
Come on, Daisy, let's take you for a wee. Close the window. Shut your eyes. Avoid killing the plant again. has returned, and like a proper Brit, I have returned with a cup of tea. This tea is fucking delicious. Ow, my leg hit my computer. So yes, I am back. I have a cup of tea and a whining dog. The stream is still active, right? Yes. Good. Oh, it looks like I am overlapping ever so slightly. Oh, whoops, that's not been in properly. Let's make that smaller as well. There. Takes up less space now.
Like the Haruspex is responsible for the deaths of both Simon and Isidore, though some people vouch for his innocence. But then you find out that Isidore is his father. Would he really just kill his dad like that? But then it turns out the plague might have killed those people, as far as you know anyway. But people seem to be saying he's going around killing people now. They're calling him the Ripper. I'd wondered if maybe you play a serial killer in his plot. When you talk to him, he seems reasonable and like he's trying to make a cure for the plague, a panacea. But both you and Dankovsky seem wary of his methods. He's using a kind of medicine that seems kind of
Daisy, come here, doggy.
folksy and a bit
Come
made
on,
up,
in your bed.
so you kind of ignore it. He's got his own shit to deal with. Something about a guy called Foreman O'Yun and what a big problem he poses.
in your
Dankovsky
bed,
never
Daisy.
even meets that guy, whoever he is. But because he's a trusted member of this culture, you need him to do some stuff for you. For part of the main plot, you have to help break him out of a prison to help you, because the governor doesn't believe he's innocent of all the shit he's heard about him at this point.
Daisy.
Basically, when you're playing as the Bachelor, the Haruspex seems a whole lot like a dangerous weirdo whose help you happen to need. But when you're playing as the Haruspex, his side of the story actually starts to make sense. And that kind of asymmetrical storytelling isn't something you tend to get in video games. In keeping with the unsettling and anxiety-inducing design of the rest of the mechanics, the game's dialogue system deliberately frustrates your ability to fully understand the story too. When you're talking to someone, you often have the chance to ask questions or make observations,
Go on,
but
back
often
in
in
your
a
bed,
chain of
Daisy.
dialogue you can't come back to. There aren't really dialogue trees here. You ask one of several things and that's your lot. Sometimes dialogue choices exit out of the conversation with no way to go back and progress it.
Daisy.
The only way to learn absolutely everything you can is to load a lot of quick saves around dialogue or try to only ask questions you think you don't already know the answer to. There is absolutely no way this wasn't intentional. The game wants you to feel trapped in dialogue, so you have to think carefully about what to ask and if you can trust those answers to ever learn anything. And you can't go back and ask the other without the inconvenience of loading a save. You have to figure out what thing your character should say which won't end the talking if you want to learn more about what's going on. So you learn to talk manipulatively instead of truthfully. Do you really need to tell someone you think their idea is bad when you can play along and learn more? It makes even dialogue somewhat tense, uncertain what option will end the talking. Take into account it's possible to fail quests by saying the wrong thing, and you have a great system nestled precisely in the fact it seems unforgiving and incomplete.
you've had a
The system only feels bad if you're trained to expect to be able to go back and learn everything you want. But as we've just spent over 40 minutes covering, the game's about not getting what you want and hating people for it. One thing that complicates discussions of the writing is the fact that the game has had 2 English translations now. The first, which came out when the game was released overseas in 2005, was notoriously so strange that some sections of the game are borderline impossible to understand without a guide or a philosophy degree, and some sections were even taken out completely for foreign releases because they just didn't make sense. The HD Remaster has a new, improved translation and has the cut parts put back in. It also has new voice recordings, which is good because the last ones weren't great.
Your sensitive hands kill more often than present life. You will inevitably cause harm, and this smartass won't consider the losses at all. You both lack mercy.
See, that's just not fitting at all. The changeling is an ambiguously magical little girl, not an evil elderly crone witch.
Simon, the land has cast out a monster from the bowels to bridle his impudence.
Katerina, oh sorry, she's Katharina in this version, is one of those clairvoyants I mentioned earlier, but she's also whacked out on morphine most of the time. This voice really isn't appropriate for her.
I need morphine.
Yeah, that's better. The new vocalists are much more fitting and better directed too. They would have had to re-record the vocals anyway because the translation they were going from was pretty bad. For example, there's a cultural term the Haruspex uses a lot to refer to the Bachelor, oinon.
Daisy!
Go, Oinon. I need time to pick up my tools.
The original vocalizations... Well, they left a little bit to be desired.
Go, Onion! I need to collect the tools. This epidemic acts as if it has a mind of its own. This disease behaves as though it has a mind of its own.
Yeah, see, maybe they forgot to delete a sentence there, I don't know.
Traces of the supernatural are found more often than most reasonable and wise people would like.
I'm not really feeling it.
Chimeras that had been...
Chimeras worship...
Okay, that's a little better. That sounds like it might even be a way of saying it. It's chimera, right? Oh god, I don't even know anymore how to pronounce chimera. Please be chimera.
Chimera.
What?
Screwed this one up. Needs fixing.
That is not how you pronounce chimera.
It sounds like someone machine translated the original Russian script into English, then went through doing right-click thesaurus to make it sound smarter. It's tough to parse and it really throws me off. Every time a character's side of a conversation turns out to be 3 lines of this kind of text, my brain groans at me and I have to pause for a sec to mentally prepare to read it. The game's weird writing was like that in the original game too. Russians don't walk around talking like this. This is just how it was written. I originally thought this line in the old translation, Immortal Dragon, was weird. Like they were trying to refer to Simon as a mythological creature, but accidentally refer to him as a creature that we have a lot of visual connotations for. The new one says Leviathan, which seems more appropriate. If you call someone a Leviathan, it sounds metaphorical and less literal. But I checked, and the original Russian version calls him an Immortal Dragon too. And dragon doesn't have any special metaphorical meaning in Russian, it just means dragon. It's just a weirdly written game that the old translation makes even weirder by taking it way too literally. But there's an interesting intersection going on here. You see, while the translation is improved, at least in my opinion, the sense of strangeness in the unforgiving and alien culture of the strange town was completely intended. Some people actually defend the older translation for adding to this feel. Like, some people will actually say that the worst translation is better at getting across the feel the game is going for. Now, we're going to get into some subjective territory here. We're going to have to peel away a few layers of the onion of interpretation. But while I can see that argument,
Phony! You're a fucking phony!
Okay, fine. I have something embarrassing to admit about my relationship with this game, which really throws my pretentious hipster credentials into question.
You telling him you're a phony yet?
Yeah, I'm doing it now!
Are you doing it?
I'm doing it!
Are you doing it?
Get out of my fucking video! You see, I have 2 failed prior attempts to make it through this game. In 2013, I found the Rock Paper Shotgun articles by Quentin Smith, hallowed be his name, and found them really convincing on the subject of how games could be. They really opened my eyes and changed how I think about gaming, so I decided to try the game for myself. The original translation bounced me right off. It was a little too much for me to want to sit down and put time into when I bought it in 2013 and had a degree to pretend to work for and Gundam to watch. And I actually took a picture on my phone of the funniest thing about this experience, which was when the most understandable sentence I'd read so far was a character apologizing for if they don't make much sense. I was like, yeah, thanks. So I stopped. Then a couple of years later I tried again, pushed past my initial problems, hated being alone with my thoughts when I was walking around the town, because most of my thoughts were about how good Turn A Gundam was, and basically did such a bad job I was dying over and over on day 2 and realized I'd have to go back, and gave up. So I spent years agreeing with critics, convinced of their arguments that games could do more things than be viscerally entertaining or mechanically fun, despite failing to play the central game many used in their example of the value of negative experiences. It was too negative for me. Only now, with the HD edition and the new translation, did I finally stick with it long enough to truly enter into the experience. And I'm glad I finally got to do that, and I think I really needed the better translation to help bring me in. That older version probably has its charms, and I'm sure it must, considering the game had defenders for almost a decade before the fixed version came out, but it was certainly too much for me. However, even the new and improved version of the game still has its problems. We've already covered aspects of the game that are just not going to be for everyone, the slow pace, the tone, feel of the gameplay and mechanics. Now let's talk about the actual problems. Part 4. The Jank. One thing that's absolutely necessary to successfully progressing the story is to read your mail. You get letters from people over the course of the day, and the only way to know you get them is to know you get them. And the only way to read them is to hit the L key on your keyboard to open up the letters menu. The game doesn't tell you this. The game's tutorial, amazing in its own way as it is, fails to tell you one of the most critical things you need to know. If you don't read your mail, you straight up will not know what to do on some days. And as far as I can tell, nothing in the game tells you unless you check your keyboard options. This is a huge oversight. The game does do interesting things with not giving you proper information, like it never tells you that food prices are about to ruin your life, or it doesn't tell you that some of your quests will end in disaster and you maybe shouldn't have bothered or run away with the money. And if someone's not going to get to those moments because they didn't understand what they were supposed to be doing, or got annoyed they haven't even been told a core feature by the game, it's a genuine flaw. Speaking of the flaw, hear that thud? When you have too many items in your inventory, the item drops on the ground in a bag and you have to drop something else to pick it up. If this is a plot important item, not hearing that and looking down to swap something out could cause a lot of problems.
Daisy,
I think the game could have done a much better job of letting you know when you don't have room for something. This is a section from the Changeling story later on. I can't pick up this bag because my inventory is full, but the game has no way of telling me, so I'm just sitting here getting stabbed to death and then have to load a save and drop something in order to pick this up. This isn't as critical, but it showcases the problem in a funny way. If you sneak up on a rat instead of letting it see you and chase you, you can pick them up and actually use them in rat races later on. But if your inventory is full, they just turn into a bag with a rat in it. If you can't progress the story because you dropped something, or you're too busy micromanaging what's in your inventory in case you get given something important, then you're being made to miss out on what's good about the game by a poorly implemented mechanic. Pathologic is already not for everybody, and the mechanical stuff like this only The mechanical stuff like this only detracts from what makes it true. There's a lot of jank in the game. AI bugs out if you stand in the wrong place during fights, spins in circles or stands still and waits to die. You can get stuck in level geometry sometimes. The physics like to explode. The thing is, a lot of these sorts of problems are a result of the game existing at all. Like, you could spend a ton of man-hours making the AI work perfectly in fights that aren't on completely flat ground, or you can get the game out before your team goes bust. And in many ways, much like I Divine Cybermancy or Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, the bugs are a good thing. They're a reminder of how much bloody work it took to whip this thing into existence with the available tools. I still shudder when I think about how to get the Source engine to do things I or Vampire did, and Pathologic's engine seems like it was made out of whole cloth. Do you have any idea how hard that is? Video games are hard to program. It takes years of work to make something good. Games, as a rule, even the stable-looking ones, are usually at their core hugely hacked together to barely do whatever they do, and even what seems like simple, slight changes run the risk of absolutely obliterating everything you hold dear. So a lot of the game's weakest aspects feel like a compromise for the inability or instability of the engine. In the story, for example, sometimes characters interact. They talk or get one another to do things, but while you're present, characters are never doing anything. They're just standing where they're supposed to be standing, and you go over and talk to them and you get the impression they're in the middle of doing it or taking a break or something. Sometimes characters meet up to discuss something or get attacked by soldiers and escape, but it's always just happened when you walk in and everything's already over whenever you're there. It's not super immersion breaking, but a little more interaction, or being able to watch the characters do the things you're told they did, might have been nice. Also, characters sharing a space together don't seem to regard each other. They either do their idle animation and occasionally say lines like they normally do just next to each other.
Yes. What is there to talk about? Are you sick or something? How's my brother? Any news on him?
Or they're completely frozen in place. You never even get to watch a conversation between two characters. Even when they're in the same room, you talk to each of them separately. Again, these aren't things I would really criticize the game for. These are reflective of the absolutely minuscule amount of budget and time the developers had, and the limitations of their engine. These are things that it would have been nice to see working better, but aren't a huge problem when you're actually playing. And there's other technical problems. There's this weird bug where the screen's entire color palette shifts when certain effects are playing, like fires or blood splatters during combat. I'm sure there's a fix for this, but I decided to just live with it. It felt in the spirit of things to do that, but it's still very distracting and definitely not intentional. All in all the little things like this contribute to the overall feeling that the creators had lofty ideas for a story and a world full of characters to interact with and environments to explore, but were limited in what they could accomplish. However, it's important not to confuse limitation with artistic choice, because some things in the game are easy to dismiss as problems, but work in the context of the story that's being told and the overall visual effect being enacted. On that note, we haven't really talked about the graphics yet. Visually, even for the time, the game was regarded as pretty ugly. Everything is a weird, angular facsimile of what it's supposed to be. The color palette is drab. Infected and dying districts tint things even uglier shades, and all the minor NPCs look the same as each other. However, I think that ugliness was deliberate and actually serves a purpose. Oh no, it's the pretentious police! They found me! Oh, Jesus Christ! The game is set in a dying rural town. The sky is never clear, everyone's sick, everything is depressing, and the filters that turn up in infected areas make everything even more sickly. The fairly low texture detail and polygon count do end up contributing to this look and feel in their own way. By being not much to look at, the downer tone set by the story and mechanics isn't thrown away by looking pretty. The game's art design when it comes to characters or the more interesting locations is imaginative enough that even if it doesn't look visually great, you can see what they're going for and understand what it's supposed to be, at least. So, at least in my opinion, the art style contributes to this feel. I think it works that it looks like this and not other ways. But I'm not sure if I'm happy with saying that, because if the game had looked better, like if it was on par with Half-Life 2, I don't think I'd have been saying, this should have looked worse, would I? It's one of those things where, because it works well enough for what it is, I don't feel a need to complain that the graphics are bad, even though obviously they could be better. People can decide for themselves where the experience is improved or worsened by things like bugs or inventory stuff, or the combat, or graphics, or translation, and ultimately the game is what you get out of it. And for some people, the line of what makes a game good is very far away from anything any version of this game is doing. It's completely understandable why some people don't engage with the game or want to and bounce off it. I certainly did that the first 2 times, so I can respect that. Like I said, it's not fun. I can't really recommend you. That's why I'm here sharing what I think is interesting about the experience and not telling you to play it for yourself. I suffered, so you didn't have to. Once you get over the initial humps and learn to deal with the difficult elements, cope with the survival mechanics, and get good at walking. Wow, what a phrase. Get good at walking. Learn to do a repetitive, unsatisfying thing on your way to a goal. Walking in Pathologic reminds me a little bit of doing exercise or cleaning my kitchen. It's not fun, but it's important to learn how to do it, or the empty cans of kidney beans that still have some juice and a bean or two in them you left on the side to figure out which bin to throw them out in start to smell after getting left there for a week. That's not a real story. Once you figure out what the game is demanding of you, it doesn't stay as difficult as it seems. I think people tend to overstate the game's unpleasantness when it's not a constant, it's just an early spike as it teaches you what the experience is going to be like. Once you get into the swing of things, The Bachelor is a cakewalk, but without the cake. I mean, you aren't exactly given no help. Almost everyone important trusts The Bachelor, and he starts out with some useful items, a weapon, decent money, some medicine, and he can make a whole lot more during the game doing quests for the rich people who trust him. It is possible to get on top of the game's economy and survival mechanics as The Bachelor. It gets hard at times, and even harder if you insist on doing the good guy things in quests, like not running away with all the money or food you bought for that one quest, or giving away literally all the money you have, saving 6 random people from getting wrongly executed, which I didn't do. I loaded my save after this cutscene played, and kept the money. And I'm a bad person for it. But even if you do all the good guy things, if you know what you're doing and take the opportunities that are given to you, you can make it through a life even while being a good person. The Bachelor's story is technically quite hard, but ultimately forgiving. It's a pretty balanced experience all in all. Anyway, the Harrispex' story begins with you bleeding to death. Upon arriving at his hometown via the train station after 10 years away studying surgery, the Harrispex, Artemi Burak, has been stabbed repeatedly in a fight with multiple people who believed him to be a murderer trying to escape via the station. Artemi's just got here and he's already bleeding out while wanted for his own father's murder. And this isn't just a cutscene that happens before the game starts. Oh no. You begin the game at the train station, surrounded by corpses with your health low, your reputation even lower, and your hunger and exhaustion meter's already half full. Now, if you were wondering why the Harrispex did what he did in his playthrough, here's the first of many reasons why. It turns out that for Artemi, everything was fucked all the time. Yeah, sure, the Bachelor playthrough was pretty hard. You maybe even figured out how to play it and not die too much. I bet you thought you were good at this game. That's where you're wrong. Daniil Dankovsky's fun step vacation was just the tutorial for Artemi Burak's tormentous nightmare!
A fight. The Harrispex. Ow.
Some people refer to playing the Haruspex as hard mode, and I must admit, at the beginning it is a little bit like getting stabbed in the dick, but after that it gets much worse. Remember that horrifying moral quandary as Dankovsky where you could risk 6 innocent people getting executed if you choose not to get involved in something that isn't your business anyway? The Haruspex has a moral quandary a million billion times harder, and it's his first quest. After getting chased into the warehouse territory by an angry mob, you go inside and meet a gang of children. This gang was there in the Bachelor's playthrough, but you only really visited them like once. They weren't really very interested in talking to you, and the Bachelor was too busy sucking up to the important people to care about a bunch of children. When you talk to Notkin, their leader, he says they have a rebel who stole something from them to defect to a rival gang. He says if you do him the favor of killing them for him, he'll give you a gun and some ammo. Now, I don't want to tip your hand as to whether that might be a useful item to have in this playthrough, but as soon as I left the building, a man tried to beat me to death. Remember that reputation mechanic? It turns out that when it's low enough, in addition to shopkeepers not trading with you, all regular NPCs will attack you in the street. Oh, and because these people are just law-abiding citizens attacking a wanted criminal, killing them in self-defense is a crime, and your reputation will drop even further.
Dog.
So either you run away to preserve what reputation you have left and try to do good things to correct it, or fight back and make everything worse. Good luck, fucker! Did those guys see me?
Daisy!
Yep, they've seen me. I feel very seen right now. Since fighting is more of a fact of the Haruspex's short life, yeah, having a gun would really help with that. So you go out into the steppe and... Oh, fuck off. Of course, this was a gang of children. Of course the rebel member is a kid. So you can tell him off and send him on his way for a minuscule reputation boost. And if you kill him, it drops a bunch because, you know...